Hello, I've created this supply and demand video for those of you that are gone or just need to hear it one more time. This is going to bring supply and demand together, which is real life in the marketplace. Some of it will be review and other things will be kind of added to our knowledge. But it's going to help us understand how the market allocates goods and services by using prices. So the first thing is what is a market system? This is very familiar to you, or should be, from when we studied free market economies and command economies. So a free market economy uses the market system. So when we answer the questions, those basic economic questions, they're answered by voluntary exchanges in the marketplace. So the market system is that social network that permits interaction between buyers and sellers. It includes all the rules and regulations, the reputations and credentials of the companies and the individuals involved. So you get to choose who you purchase your products from. The market system is where market players bid and ask. When it says market players, we're talking about consumers and producers. There's lots of different types of markets, and some of those are auctions. Maybe we'll ration our goods. There's also a black market, which is where illegal products are sold, and the free market. There's real estate markets, and there's also stock markets. So lots of markets are involved that might have a market system. We're reminded in a market system that there's interdependency amongst the players in that system. So the players in this model here are the households and the businesses or firms. So they rely on each other in order for a market system to work. So the households, they own the factors of production like the land, labor, and capital. So they're purchasing them from the firms and organizations, and then they own them. They are also the consumers of those goods and services. A business or firm is that organization that uses the resources to produce a product or service, which it then in turn sells to those households. So the firms transform those inputs or factors of productions into outputs and goods and services. And we represent those exchanges in a diagram like this one, which we call the circular flow model. And the circular flow model shows us how each of these groups rely on each other. So the top half is represented by the product market, and that's an arena in which households buy the goods and services that the firms produce. So when you buy food at a marketplace, you're taking part in that product market physical flow, which is represented up here. The bottom half is represented by the free market, and that is where firms purchase the factors of productions from households. So this arena is called the factor market. So an example of this might be when a firm goes to purchase or rent land. They also have to hire workers. They pay them wages for their labor. They might borrow money from households to purchase that capital through banks, and that helps us pay through interest or profits in return. So we have to rely on each other for that circular flow to work. Sometimes the circular flow is also what's shown through our circular flow of money. You don't need to memorize anything about this other than to know that we have to rely on each other. So equilibrium prices are critical to a market system. So this is where we combine supply and demand, and equilibrium is the point where quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded. We also call this the market clearing price. That equilibrium price is always changing based on market conditions, and that's why we have shortages and we have surpluses. But it's important to know that this is where businesses are always trying to get, because it's the businesses that ultimately set the prices. Anytime you are not at the price of equilibrium, where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, then that means you're at a disequilibrium. So if the market for quantity supplied or demanded is anywhere but the equilibrium, we call that disequilibrium. In this particular case, we are showing excess demand. So that means that the quantity demanded right here is greater than the quantity supplied. So the red curve represents demand, the blue curve represents supply, and if this was the case at this particular price point right here, quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. So we have too much demand. And so what suppliers will do is they'll keep raising their prices to try to get to this equilibrium price. Another aspect of disequilibrium is when we have too much supply. So we have excess supply. So that would be if the price is above the equilibrium. So right here, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So what suppliers will do is they'll lower their prices and they'll cut production until this gap is closed and can get to that equilibrium again. So anytime suppliers are at a disequilibrium, they're trying to make changes to get us back to that. And that sounds easy, but it's not because of the changing conditions in the marketplace, which we talked about all of those, or some of those anyway, with the determinants that we've studied. Now, sometimes the government will step in, and when the government intervenes with prices, they might set a price ceiling or a price floor. Price ceilings are when they come in and they see a product price getting way too high. So they say, you know what, as a government, we're going to set a law, and we're going to say, you cannot go higher than this price, which sounds great for consumers, but it's not necessarily. So I'm going to skip down here to what happens. If you set a price ceiling that is below the equilibrium price, so it's here and I can't go higher, I can't get to the equilibrium. So that causes a condition where we have excess demand. We have more quantity demanded than we have supplied. So there's a shortage in that product. An example of that happening in history is with rent controls. So I want you to watch this video, which will talk about rent controls to help understand that better. The other way that the government intervenes is through price floors. So they will set a legal minimum for a product. This here will explain price floors, and an example of price floors is with minimum wage. So again, the problem with price floors is that if we set minimum wage too high, so higher than the equilibrium where we can't go below that, then we have caused a surplus. So if this represents the number of workers at a particular price, what happens is you have lots of workers wanting to work, a high supply of workers, but businesses just aren't demanding it. So that in turn looks like unemployment. So although raising minimum wage might sound like a great idea, what happens is businesses decide, you know what, we're just won't employ as many people if we have to pay them more. And so we end up with a surplus of workers. So again, the government intervenes by implementing price ceilings or price floors. Watch those videos to learn more. This diagram shows you the problem that occurs from a price floor. So if a price floor gets set too high, we have a surplus. If a price ceiling gets set too low, we have a shortage. Watch this video to learn more. Now, the equilibrium can change, right? So if there's changes in price, so if price happens first, that's movement along the curve to try to get to the equilibrium. But there's other things in our marketplace that make our lines shift. So it makes the demand curve and the supply curve shift, and that's the determinants that we've already studied. And when that happens, the equilibrium price changes. And you guys have already shown me that you are starting to catch on to what that change looks like. The new equilibrium price changes, what that looks like. So there are other ways to allocate goods in a market besides price, and so that's what I'm going to show you next. When we say that the allocation method is price, which is typically how we allocate our goods and services, it's supply and demand that determine those market prices. But there are other ways that you can allocate resources. You could do that based on first come, first serve. So let's take a look. If we had 5 chairs in our classroom, I could put a price on those chairs and I could say, all right, who wants to pay me for these chairs? You're the ones who gets them. Or we could say first come, first serve. First one to arrive in the classroom, you get the chairs for the day. Or we could have a contest where the winner gets the good or service. So we could say, all right, let's go see who can make the most free throws. You're the one who gets the chairs for the day. I could apply force. So I could have resources given or taken away using threats. So if you don't sit in this chair today, you'll have to stay after school. Some of you might respond to that threat and others might not. We could share it. So we could decide, on Mondays, these 5 get it. Tuesdays, these 5. So typically in sharing, the owner gets to decide who gets the resource and how they get it. Other ways to allocate goods are by majority rule. Let's vote which 5 get to have the chairs for today. Maybe a lottery. That's random selection where we put all of your names into a hat and we'll draw out who gets the chairs. Or maybe it's personal characteristics. So it's who has the blonde most blondest hair. You get to have the chairs. Or maybe it's by authority. I'll just decide who gets the chairs. So all of those ways are ways to allocate resources, but typically with supply and demand, it's prices, and the prices send signals in the marketplace. So let's talk a little bit more about characteristics of the price system. Market systems are based on prices. We've just learned that. Prices are key to equilibrium, so you have to understand both of those. Prices help allocate our goods and services. High prices encourage suppliers to produce more. So there's the law of supply for you. Here's the law of demand now. Low prices encourage buyers to demand more. And because of those two things are very predictable, because we respond in predictable ways, they'll use prices to solve the problem of shortage or surplus. Additional characteristics are that first a shift happens and then a price change to try to restore to that equilibrium. So lower prices to try to solve a surplus, and you increase prices to try to solve a shortage. Benefits of the price system are that first, prices are responsive to the marketplace. So it's an easy way to respond to our different market conditions to try to solve the problems that we have. There's other ways to respond, but the price system is one of the most efficient ways to do that. It's free. It doesn't cost anything to administer. The suppliers just simply change their price. It's flexible. Prices can be easily increased to solve a problem of shortage, and they can be decreased to eliminate a surplus. So you're not stuck with one price. So efficient, free, and flexible are three benefits of a price system. Your notes also has cons, but we're not going to actually get into those cons and talk about them. Here's some other things to just know about prices being responsive and flexible. The first thing is sometimes you have a sudden shortage of a good, and we call that a supply shock. It shocks the marketplace. And that's typically created because suppliers can no longer meet demand. So maybe there's been a huge demand for a product that they just weren't ready for, and we call that supply shock, where there's just a sudden shortage. So how do people typically respond? Well, there might be some type of rationing involved. And rationing is a system where we allocate goods and services using some other criteria than price. So we might allocate goods and services using the determinants, so something else other than price. Typically, rationing is the basis of central planning. Remember, central planning was that economic system that falls very closely to command. So rationing has been used at times in U.S. history. We saw this in Russia when there was a shortage of food. The command system rationed their food. What can happen through a rationing system is that sometimes things can be bought and sold on a black market. And the black market is where it allows consumers to pay more so they can buy a product when rationing makes it otherwise unavailable. And typically that's done through a black market, is done illegally. And so the black market is strongly discouraged by governments. And then you could also respond by just offering a price increase. You could see sudden increases. Sometimes we'll see this at the gas pump where prices raise all of a sudden because of a supply shock. So that's just a little bit more information about our market system and how prices are the ones that help us allocate our goods and services. So just real fast, here in your notes, I know that you have the pros as efficient, free, and flexible. Cons are imperfect competition, externalities, and imperfect information. We're actually not going to study those cons. To me, that's a whole nother unit, and we're just not going to do that this semester. So we have now covered all three learning goals in our unit. So you're ready to study and review and practice. Be sure to ask questions if there's something you don't understand. Have a great day.